My twin and I finished law school together, but our parents paid off his loans and pretended mine didn't exist. The air tasted like possibility on graduation day. I adjusted my cap and smiled at my reflection, watching as the tassel swung like a pendulum, marking the passage of time. 3 years of sleepless nights, caffeine-fueled study sessions, and crushing anxiety had finally culminated in this moment. Elena Martinez, Juris Doctor. The words still didn't feel real. Elena! Hurry up. My mother's voice echoed up the stairs of our childhood home, where I was staying for the weekend. We can't be late for Lucas's big day. I bit my tongue and slipped into my heels. Our big day.
It was our big day.
But I'd long stopped correcting her. What was the point? Downstairs, Lucas was already surrounded by our parents, their faces glowing with pride as they straightened his tie and fussed with his hair. My twin brother caught my eye and winked. Despite everything, we had always been each other's allies, or so I thought. There she is, my father said, finally noticing me, the second lawyer in the family. He patted my shoulder briefly before turning back to Lucas. But this guy here, he's going to change the Martinez name forever. Lucas grinned, basking in the attention.
Come on, Dad.
Elena graduated with honors too. Of course, my father said dismissively. You both did well. I had graduated 4th in our class. Lucas was 12th. But somehow, in my parents' eyes, his achievement always shone brighter. That was the story of our lives, told in 1,000 small moments like this one. The ceremony itself was a blur of speeches, names, and the weight of the diploma in my hands. I looked out into the crowd and spotted my parents, their phones raised high as they recorded Lucas crossing the stage. When my name was called minutes later, they were busy showing something on their phones to the couple next to them. I swallowed hard and walked across anyway, head high. This moment was mine, whether they witnessed it or not. Later that evening, our parents threw what they called the graduation party of the season. Our backyard had been transformed into something from a magazine spread, twinkling lights hanging from trees, champagne fountains, gourmet catering, and even a live band. The guest list included judges, partners from my father's firm, and apparently everyone they'd ever met. Who are all these people? I whispered to Lucas as we stood near the entrance, greeting guests. Dad's clients, mostly. Some potential connections. He straightened his shoulders, already playing the part of the promising young lawyer. You should network. It's never too early. I nodded, though I already had a position lined up at Cooper & Hayes, a mid-sized firm specializing in corporate law. Not as prestigious as my father's firm, Martinez & Associates, but it was something I'd earned on my own merits. Throughout the evening, I was introduced as Lucas's sister, or the other graduate, while Lucas was presented with flowery speeches about his potential and future. I drifted between conversations, a champagne flute permanently attached to my hand, smiling until my cheeks hurt. Elena! My mother's voice cut through my thoughts. Come meet Judge Whitmore. He knew your grandfather. I obediently followed her to an elderly man with sharp eyes and a firm handshake. So you're Robert's granddaughter, he said, appraising me. He was a hell of a lawyer. Left quite a legacy, didn't he? Yes, sir, I replied, thinking of the grandfather I barely remembered, but whose name was spoken with reverence in our house. He'd built the foundation of what became my father's firm. Your brother's joining your father's practice, I hear. Following in the family footsteps. What about you? Before I could answer, my mother cut in. Elena's taking a different path. She's always been so independent. The way she said it made it sound like a character flaw. Judge Whitmore raised an eyebrow. Independence is a virtue in our profession, Margaret. Elena, what area of law interests you? For the first time that evening, someone was asking about me, about my plans. I was halfway through explaining my interest in corporate compliance when my mother spotted someone more important and whisked the judge away. As midnight approached, the crowd thinned. I found myself alone on the patio, watching the staff begin to clean up. The fairy lights still twinkled overhead, but their magic had faded hours ago. There you are, Lucas said, dropping into the chair beside me. His tie was loosened, his hair disheveled. Some party, huh? Yeah, I said, twirling my empty glass. Some party. Dad says we're having a family toast inside. Just the four of us. He stood and offered his hand. Come on, sis. One more celebration before real life begins. I followed him into my father's study, where our parents waited with a bottle of scotch that probably cost more than my first month's rent. Crystal glasses clinked as my father poured generous amounts for himself and Lucas, smaller portions for my mother and me. To the future of Martinez and Associates, my father said, raising his glass. And to my son, who will someday take over the legacy we've built. We drank. The scotch burned my throat, but not as much as the exclusion burned my heart. Dad, Lucas said, his voice unusually serious. What about the loans? They're pretty steep. My father laughed and clapped Lucas on the shoulder. Your loans are taken care of, son. You don't have to worry about a thing. Consider it our investment in the future of the firm. My glass froze halfway to my lips. What about mine? The words escaped before I could stop them. My parents exchanged a glance I couldn't interpret. Then my mother waved her hand dismissively. Oh, Elena, you're independent. You'll figure it out. I laughed, waiting for the punchline. You're joking, right? The silence that followed was answer enough. My father cleared his throat and changed the subject, while Lucas avoided my eyes, suddenly very interested in his scotch. That night, lying in my childhood bed surrounded by trophies and ribbons that had never impressed my parents as much as Lucas's, I stared at the ceiling and felt something cold and hard form in my chest. It wasn't just about the money, though $200,000 in student loans was no small matter. It was about the message. Lucas was worth investing in. I was on my own. I was still their daughter, still Lucas's twin. But in that moment, I finally understood the truth that had been written between the lines my entire life. In the story my parents were telling, I was never meant to be the protagonist. Little did they know I was about to rewrite the entire narrative. 6 months after graduation, I sat at my cramped kitchen table staring at the letter that had just arrived. The first student loan payment was due, $2,340, monthly, for the next 10 years. My hands trembled as I calculated the numbers again. With my starting salary at Cooper and Hayes, after taxes, rent, and basic necessities, I'd have barely anything left. I'd known the day would come, but seeing the actual figure made it impossible to breathe. My phone lit up with a text from Lucas. Check out my new view. Dad's putting me on the Davidson case. Attached was a photo taken from the corner office on the 45th floor of Martinez and Associates, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river. The kind of view partners got, not first-year associates. I didn't respond. Instead, I grabbed my keys and drove to my parents' house, the loan statement crushed in my fist. This had to be a misunderstanding. They couldn't possibly expect me to shoulder this alone while giving Lucas a free ride. My mother answered the door in tennis whites, clearly on her way out. Elena, what a surprise. I'm running late for doubles with Judith. Can this wait? No, Mom, it can't. I pushed past her into the house, waving the crumpled paper. We need to talk about this. She sighed dramatically. About what, dear? My student loans. The first payment is due, and it's over $2,000 a month. You told Dad you'd help me too, right? Like you're helping Lucas? My mother's face shifted from annoyance to practiced confusion. Elena, we never promised to pay our loans. You've always been more responsible with money than your brother. We knew you'd figure it out. The casual gaslighting was like a slap. That's not true. You promised both of us. When we decided on law school, you said, I think you're misremembering, honey. She patted my arm condescendingly. Your father and I discussed this. Lucas is working for the family business. It's an investment in the firm's future. And what am I? Just a drain on resources? The words came out raw and hurt. She checked her watch. Don't be dramatic. You chose to work elsewhere. That was your decision. She moved toward the door. I really have to go. We can discuss this later, if you're still upset. I stood in the foyer, speechless, as she grabbed her tennis bag and left. The door closed behind her with a soft click that somehow felt more final than a slam. That evening, my father called. I expected an apology, an explanation. Instead, he offered me a special arrangement. I could come work at the firm for significantly less than I was making at Cooper and Hayes, and they'd consider helping with my loans after a year or two of proving myself. It wasn't an offer. It was an insult. "No thanks," I said, my voice ice. "I'd rather earn my way than beg for what you freely gave Lucas." The next 3 months were brutal. I took on every extra assignment at the firm, hoping for bonuses. I moved to a smaller apartment in a questionable neighborhood. I sold my car and took the bus. I ate ramen for dinner 4 nights a week and tracked every penny. Meanwhile, Lucas's Instagram became a showcase of privilege. Skiing in Aspen, dining at Michelin-starred restaurants, the keys to his new BMW, a down payment on a luxury condo, courtesy of the bank of mom and dad. He joked in one caption. The night he posted about his European vacation, "Dad says I earned it after winning my first case." Something inside me snapped. I'd just finished a 14-hour workday, my eyes burning from reviewing contracts, my dinner a sad microwave meal eaten standing up. I called him, my brother, my twin, the person who was supposed to understand me better than anyone. "Hey, sis. Long time no talk," he answered, sounds of a party in the background. "Lucas." My voice was tight. "Do you ever think about how different our lives are now?" He laughed. "Yeah, I mean, corporate law seems brutal. Dad says you're working yourself to death over there." "That's not what I meant. Our parents paid your loans. They bought you a car, a condo. You're in Europe while I'm working overtime just to make minimum payments on my debt." The background noise faded as he presumably moved somewhere quieter. "Elena, come on. It's not my fault they want to support me. Maybe if you joined the firm. For half my current salary? To be treated like an intern while you get the corner office." "Look," his voice took on the patronizing tone my mother often used. "I can't help that Dad sees me as the future of the firm. Maybe try being less, I don't know, difficult? You always push back on everything." "Difficult? Is that what you call wanting to be treated equally?" Lucas sighed. "It's not my problem, Elena. If you're struggling, that's on you. I didn't ask them to pay my loans. But you happily let them, while knowing I was drowning. What was I supposed to do? Refuse their help?" He laughed. "That would be stupid. You could have stood up for me. Asked them why they were treating us differently. You're my twin, Lucas. Look, I've got to go. We're heading to dinner. Some of us are trying to enjoy life instead of complaining about it all the time." The call ended, and I sat in my tiny apartment, surrounded by case files and bills, something cold and hard crystallizing in my chest. I'd been naive to think blood meant loyalty, to think that my twin would see the injustice. That night, I made 2 decisions that would change everything. First, I would stop expecting fairness from people who had shown me repeatedly that I didn't matter as much as my brother. Second, I would find out exactly how deep this betrayal went. Little did I know, I was only scratching the surface. Winter arrived with a vengeance, bringing bitter winds and early darkness. My apartment's heating system worked sporadically at best, forcing me to sleep in layers of sweaters and socks. The student loan company had started calling daily, their patience wearing thin despite my partial payments. That particular Friday, I'd spent 14 hours at the office, only to come home to a notice threatening legal action if I didn't make a full payment soon. The irony wasn't lost on me, a lawyer being sued for debt. I laughed until the laughter turned to tears. Something Judge Whitmore had said at graduation kept replaying in my mind. Left quite a legacy, didn't he? He'd been talking about my grandfather, Robert Martinez, the founder of what became my father's firm. I'd always known there was some inheritance, something my grandfather had left for Lucas and me. My parents had mentioned it occasionally when we were growing up, always with the caveat that it was for when the time was right. At 3 a.m, exhausted but unable to sleep, I made a decision. My parents would be at their winter home in Florida for another week. The spare key to their house was still hidden in the same spot it had been since childhood, beneath the stone angel in the garden. It felt surreal driving to my childhood home in the pre-dawn darkness, like I was starring in my own heist movie. Except what I was after wasn't jewels or cash. It was the truth. The house was silent, and still as I let myself in, the familiar scent of my mother's preferred room fragrance washing over me. I moved through the darkened rooms with practiced ease, heading directly for my father's study. The study had always been off-limits growing up, a temple to my father's importance and power. Now, standing in the doorway, it seemed smaller somehow. Just a room with heavy oak furniture and walls lined with law books nobody ever read. My father's desk was locked, but I knew where he kept the key, inside a hollowed-out copy of Great Expectations. How fitting. I'd once had great expectations, too. The desk drawers revealed nothing of interest. Tax records, insurance policies, the usual paperwork of an upper-middle-class life. But when I turned my attention to the built-in filing cabinet behind the desk, I struck gold. In a folder labeled Family Trusts lay the answer to questions I hadn't even thought to ask. According to the documents inside, my grandfather had indeed left Lucas and me equal inheritances, trust funds that would fully mature when we turned 30, but could be partially accessed for education and major life expenses after 21. My hands trembled as I flipped through statements dating back 7 years. There, in black and white, was the evidence. While Lucas's trust had grown steadily with modest withdrawals for educational expenses, mine had been systematically drained. A withdrawal of $45,000 marked educational expense, Elena, dated during my second year of law school. Except I'd never seen a penny of it. Another for $60,000 labeled Elena's tuition. But I'd taken out loans for every semester. Then the larger withdrawals began. $150,000 for Elena's approved housing investment, $85,000 for Elena's approved vehicle purchase. None of which had ever materialized in my life. The most recent withdrawal, dated just 3 months after our graduation, was the final blow. $250,000 for Elena's approved business investment. In total, over $600,000 had been withdrawn from my trust fund, my inheritance, under the guise of expenses for me. Money I had never seen, never approved, never benefited from. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and began taking photos of every document, every statement, every forged authorization. When I came across a folder labeled Lucas Property, I opened it to find the deed to his luxury condo. The purchase price, $450,000. The source of the down payment clearly noted in my father's handwriting. E-Trust. My trust. My inheritance. My future security, stolen by my own parents to fund my brother's lavish lifestyle. But the betrayal cut deeper than the money. In another folder labeled Martinez and Associates, Succession Plan, I found a document outlining the future of the firm. Lucas was named as the sole heir, set to receive controlling interest upon my father's retirement. A handwritten note in the margin read, Elena, offered junior partnership at $50K if she comes around. If I came around, as if my worth was determined by my willingness to accept scraps from their table. Tears blurred my vision as I methodically photographed every document. The sky outside was lightening, warning me that time was running short. I carefully returned everything to its place, locked the desk, and replaced the key. As I was leaving, a framed photo on the mantel caught my eye. It was from our law school graduation, Lucas flanked by our beaming parents, while I stood slightly apart, my smile not quite reaching my eyes. I'd thought it was just an unfortunate camera angle at the time. Now I saw it for what it was, a perfect representation of my place in this family. Always the outsider. Always the afterthought. I set the frame back down with a new resolve hardening in my chest. They had taken my inheritance, my security, my rightful place, and given it all to Lucas. They had stolen from me while smiling to my face, pretending it was for my own good, that I was independent. Well, they wanted independent. They were about to get it. As I drove away from my childhood home for what I knew would be the last time, a plan began to form. I wasn't just going to reclaim what was mine. I was going to dismantle everything they had built on the foundation of their betrayal. I waited 3 days before making my move. 3 days of careful preparation, organizing evidence, and steeling myself for what would come. 3 days of barely eating or sleeping, running on nothing but fury and determination. Sunday family dinner had been a monthly tradition in the Martinez household for as long as I could remember. I'd skipped the last 6, citing work commitments. This time, I accepted my mother's invitation with an enthusiasm that made her voice brighten noticeably. "Oh, wonderful. Lucas will be so pleased. He's been asking about you." I doubted that very much, but I smiled into the phone and said, "I've missed everyone. I have some exciting news to share." That wasn't a lie. I did have news, just not the kind they were expecting. I arrived early, dressed in a sharp charcoal suit I'd splurged on despite my financial situation. Armor for battle. My mother kissed my cheek, commenting on how professional I looked. My father gave me a distracted hello before returning to his conversation with Lucas, who was sprawled on the sofa in designer casual wear, looking tanned from what I assumed was yet another vacation. Dinner was my mother's specialty: roast beef, Yorkshire pudding, and all the trimmings. She'd even made my favorite dessert, creme brulee. A peace offering, perhaps, or more likely, an attempt to soften whatever grievances I might still harbor. "So, Elena," my father said as we settled around the table, "your mother mentioned you have news. Finally seeing someone? Or is it a promotion?" Lucas smirked. Maybe she's finally realized corporate law is soul-crushing and wants to join the family firm. I took a sip of water, meeting each of their gazes in turn. "Actually, I've been doing some research into family finances." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. My father's hand paused midway to his wine glass. "What do you mean?" My mother's voice was carefully controlled. I placed a folder on the table beside my plate. I found some interesting documents about my trust fund. Specifically, how it's been used to fund Lucas's lifestyle while I drown in student debt. My father's face darkened. "You went through my private files?" "Interesting that's your first concern," I said, keeping my voice level. "Not the fraud you've committed, or the theft from your own daughter." Lucas rolled his eyes. "Always so dramatic, Elena." I turned to him. "Did you know, Lucas, that your condo, your car, your vacations, they were paid for with my inheritance? Or were you just willfully ignorant?" He glanced at our father, uncertainty flashing across his face for the first time. My mother reached across the table as if to take my hand, but I pulled away. "Elena, sweetheart, you're misunderstanding things. Your grandfather's money had certain conditions." "Save it." I cut her off, pulling photocopies from the folder. "I have the original trust documents right here." The conditions were identical for both trusts. The only difference is that mine has been systematically drained without my knowledge or consent. My father's strategy shifted from denial to justification. "We made decisions that were best for this family. The firm is our legacy." "Your legacy," I corrected. "According to your succession plan, I was never meant to be part of it. Just offered a pittance of a salary if I came around." He had the decency to look momentarily ashamed before his face hardened again. "You always make everything about you, Elena. This family, this firm, it's bigger than any individual." Lucas understood that. He was willing to put the Martinez name first. "By taking what was rightfully mine?" My mother sighed dramatically. "We raised you both. Paid for your upbringing, your education." "My education?" I laughed, the sound brittle even to my own ears. "I have $200,000 in student loans that say otherwise." Lucas, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. "Look, sis, I didn't know the details, okay? Dad handled all the financial stuff. I just assumed." "You assumed what? That I was somehow less deserving? That my future didn't matter as much as yours?" He shrugged, a gesture so callous it stole my breath. "It's not my fault they love me more." The room fell silent. Even my parents looked shocked at his bluntness. "Lucas," my mother finally gasped. But the damage was done. The truth was out, spoken aloud for the first time. I looked at my twin brother, my flesh and blood, the person I'd shared a womb with, and saw a stranger. "What do you want, Elena?" my father asked, his voice tired. "Money? Is that it? We can arrange something. A monthly stipend, perhaps. I want what's legally mine. The full amount that was taken from my trust with interest.
He scoffed.
That's over $500,000. The money's gone, invested in the firm, in property. Then sell the property. Take it from the firm. Figure it out. I stood up, my dinner untouched. You have 30 days to transfer the full amount, or I'll be pursuing legal action. My mother's face crumpled. You would see your own parents? Your own brother? After everything we've done for you? What exactly have you done for me, Mom? Besides teach me that in this family, I will always be worth less. You're being ridiculous, my father snapped. This entitled attitude is exactly why we've always had concerns about your judgment. Lucas is the future of this family. You'll be fine. In that moment, I saw with perfect clarity what I should have recognized years ago. They never planned for me to succeed. I was just the spare, the one expected to fend for herself, while Lucas got everything handed to him. I gathered my things, a strange calm settling over me. 30 days. Then we'll see what the Bar Association and the IRS have to say about how you've managed your daughter's trust fund. Lucas's face paled. You wouldn't. Watch me. I walked to the door, then turned back one last time. Oh, and I quit Cooper and Hayes yesterday. Apparently, they have some concerns about potential conflicts of interest, given what's coming. I left them sitting there, my mother calling after me, my father silent, Lucas looking shell-shocked. For the first time in my life, I felt powerful in their presence. They thought they knew me. They thought I would accept their scraps and their excuses, that I would continue to be the good, accommodating daughter who never made waves. They had no idea what was coming. 30 days came and went. No money appeared in my account. No apologetic calls from my parents. Just silence, their final mistake. I'd spent those 30 days building my case meticulously. My legal training wasn't just for show, and it turned out I had a talent for financial forensics that surprised even me. What began as an investigation into my stolen inheritance expanded into something far more extensive. Martinez and Associates occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming downtown skyscraper. I stood across the street, watching people stream in and out, feeling oddly detached from the nervous energy that should have accompanied what I was about to do. Diane Lewis, an investigator with the State Bar Association, met me in a coffee shop 2 blocks away. A stern woman in her 50s with shrewd eyes that missed nothing, she reviewed my documents with methodical precision. You understand what you're doing? She asked, not unkindly. Once this starts, there's no going back. I understand, I said. They've had every opportunity to make this right. She nodded once, satisfied, and slipped the files into her briefcase. We'll be in touch. And Ms. Martinez? Whatever happens, you did the right thing. My next stop was across town, where I had a similar meeting with Special Agent Carter from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. The evidence I'd gathered painted a picture far darker than family favoritism. Your father's firm has been playing fast and loose with client funds for years, Carter said, reviewing the spreadsheets I'd meticulously compiled. This trust fund business is just the tip of the iceberg. I suspected as much. I replied, remembering late-night conversations I'd overheard growing up, the sudden vacations when certain clients became too demanding, the way my father would sometimes lock himself in his study for days during audit seasons. How did you get access to some of these accounts? Carter asked, eyes narrowing. I smiled thinly. Let's just say that Lucas wasn't the only one my father taught the family business to. I worked 3 summers at the firm during undergrad. Administrative access doesn't change as often as it should. The third and final meeting was with Rebecca Oakes, an investigative reporter whose exposés on white-collar crime had ended several high-profile careers. I'd reached out to her weeks ago, building a relationship slowly, laying the groundwork for today. This is extensive, she said, scrolling through the digital files I'd provided. Tax fraud, misappropriation of client funds, trust violations. You realize this will destroy your family's reputation completely? They're not my family anymore, I said, the words tasting strange but true. They're just people who happen to share my DNA. Rebecca studied me for a long moment. What about your brother? These documents implicate him too. I'd wrestled with this question for weeks. Lucas had benefited from my parents' schemes, lived lavishly on my stolen inheritance. But had he known the extent of it? Had he been an active participant or just a willing beneficiary? In the end, it didn't matter. He'd had the chance to stand with me, to make things right. He'd chosen our parents instead. He made his choice. I said finally. He'll have to live with the consequences. The article broke on a Tuesday morning. By noon, Martinez and Associates was swarming with investigators from the Bar Association and the IRS. By dinner, my father's face was on every local news channel, the headline stark, prominent attorney accused of massive fraud scheme. I watched it all unfold from the quiet of a rented lakeside cabin an hour outside the city. My phone exploded with notifications, calls and texts from my parents and Lucas, from former colleagues, from friends who hadn't bothered to stay in touch until scandal made me interesting again. I ignored them all. This wasn't about attention or drama. This was justice, cold and clean. 3 days later, as the media firestorm continued to rage, a familiar car pulled into the cabin's driveway. Lucas, looking haggard and desperate, pounded on my door until I finally opened it. "How could you?" he demanded, pushing past me into the cabin. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Dad's been interim suspended from practice. The firm is hemorrhaging clients. Mom had to be sedated. They're talking about criminal charges, Elena." "Criminal charges?" I regarded him calmly. "I know exactly what I've done. I've revealed the truth." "The truth?" He laughed, a broken sound. "The truth is you've destroyed our family because you couldn't stand that they preferred me." "No, Lucas. The truth is they stole from me to fund your life of luxury. The truth is they committed fraud, tax evasion, and misappropriation of client funds. The truth is they chose you, again and again, at my expense. And you let them." He collapsed onto my sofa, head in his hands. "What am I supposed to do now? My partnership is gone. My reputation is ruined. I can't even get into my bank accounts. They're all frozen pending investigation." For a moment, I felt a flicker of the old bond between us, the twin connection that had once meant everything. Then I remembered all the times he'd known I was struggling and done nothing. All the times he'd accepted gifts bought with my stolen future. "You'll figure it out," I said, echoing our mother's dismissive words. "You're independent, right?" His head snapped up, eyes widening at the familiar phrase thrown back at him. "Elena, please. I need help. I've got nowhere to go." I walked to the door and held it open. "That sounds like a personal problem. You can't just—" "I can. And I am." I met his gaze steadily. "You said it yourself at dinner that night, Lucas. It's not your fault they loved you more. Well, this isn't my fault either. It's just consequences." After he left, I sat on the porch watching the sunset over the lake. A strange lightness filled me. Not happiness exactly, but something adjacent to it. Freedom, perhaps. The burden of seeking my family's approval, of competing with Lucas for scraps of affection, had finally lifted. My phone pinged with an email from Agent Carter. "Thought you'd want to know. Assets seized. Charges being filed tomorrow. Your trust fund recovery is being prioritized." Justice was coming, and it tasted sweeter than I'd ever imagined. 1 year later, I stood in the lobby of what was once Martinez and Associates, now renamed Whitmore, Chun and Partners, after Judge Whitmore's daughter and her business partner took over the remains of my father's disgraced firm. The receptionist didn't recognize me. Why would she? The building had been sold, the staff replaced, the very foundation rebuilt. "Elena Martinez to see Sandra Whitmore," I said, my voice steady. The receptionist smiled. "She's expecting you. 15th floor, end of the hall." The elevator ride gave me a moment to reflect on the whirlwind of the past year. My father had pleaded guilty to multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion to avoid an even longer sentence. He was currently serving 8 years in a minimum security federal prison. My mother, while not criminally charged, had been named in multiple civil suits and lost nearly everything in the settlements. The beautiful house I'd grown up in had been sold at auction. Their social circle had evaporated overnight. fair-weather friends suddenly developing amnesia about their decades-long relationships. And Lucas? He'd been disbarred. The evidence showed he had knowingly participated in at least some of the financial improprieties, though to a lesser extent than our father. His ignorance of the law wasn't an excuse. The Bar Association had concluded. He'd been spared criminal charges only because he'd turned state's evidence against our father. Last I'd heard, he was working as a paralegal in a small town 3 states away, renting a 1-bedroom apartment, and driving a 10-year-old Honda. A lifestyle not unlike the one I'd been living while he was vacationing in Europe. The elevator doors opened on the 15th floor. Sandra Whitmore, a razor-sharp attorney in her 40s whom I'd met during the investigation, greeted me with a firm handshake. "Right on time, Elena. I appreciate punctuality." She led me to a spacious corner office. Not my father's old office, I noticed. That particular space had been converted into a conference room. "Have a seat." I settled into the chair across from her desk, taking in the view of the city's skyline. "Thank you for meeting with me." "Of course." She slid a folder across the desk. "The final recovery amount from your trust fund. With interest and punitive damages, it comes to just over $850,000. The funds have been transferred to your account as of this morning." I opened the folder, scanning the documents inside. It was all there, the culmination of a year-long legal battle to reclaim what had been stolen from me. I should have felt elated, vindicated. Instead, I felt oddly hollow. Sandra seemed to sense my ambivalence. "Money doesn't fix everything, does it?" "No," I admitted, "but it helps." She laughed, a genuine sound. "That it does." She leaned forward, studying me. "So, what's next for you, Elena Martinez? With your skills and reputation, you could write your own ticket at any firm in the city." My reputation. It was ironic how exposing my family's corruption had established me as someone with integrity and courage in legal circles. The Martinez name, once synonymous with influence and success because of my father, now carried weight because of me, but for entirely different reasons. "Actually," I said, "I've been working on something of my own." I shared my plans with Sandra, the small practice I was establishing, focusing on advocacy for victims of financial fraud and abuse. It wasn't glamorous work and it wouldn't make me rich, but it felt right. Using what I'd learned through my own experience to help others find justice. "Impressive," Sandra said when I'd finished. Then, unexpectedly, "We should talk about a potential partnership. Not now, you need to establish yourself first. But perhaps in a year or 2. We could use someone with your perspective." We discussed possibilities for collaboration, and by the time I left her office, I had not only recovered my inheritance, but gained a powerful ally in the legal community. Outside the building, spring sunshine warmed my face. My phone buzzed with a text from Maya, a law school classmate who'd reached out after my story broke, offering support when so many others had distanced themselves. We'd grown close over the past year, her unwavering friendship a balm during the darkest times. "How did it go?" she asked. "It's done," I replied. "Dinner tonight to celebrate?" "Absolutely. Your place or mine?" I smiled. "Mine. I'm making that pasta you like." My place. My own condo, purchased outright with part of the recovered funds. Not as luxurious as the one Lucas had bought with my stolen money, but mine free and clear. No debt. No strings. No one to answer to but myself. As I walked to my car, another text came through. This one from a number I didn't immediately recognize. When I opened it, my breath caught. "Elena, it's Mom.
Please call me.
I'm sorry for everything. I miss you." I stared at the message for a long moment, emotions warring within me. Anger, hurt, a tiny, persistent thread of love that refused to die completely. My thumb hovered over the delete button. Instead, I typed, "I'm not ready to talk yet." It was the truth. I wasn't sure I'd ever be ready, but I was no longer consumed by bitterness. My life was moving forward on my terms. That evening, as Maya and I shared dinner in my home, glasses raised in celebration, she asked the question I'd been asking myself for months. "Do you regret any of it?" Exposing them, I mean. I considered this carefully. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that they made choices that left me no alternative. But no, I don't regret standing up for myself. To Elena Martinez, she said, raising her glass, who proved that karma always collects. I smiled and clinked my glass against hers. And to new beginnings. Outside my window, the city lights twinkled like stars. Tomorrow, I would sign the lease on my new office space. The week after, I would take on my first client. The future stretched before me, uncertain but full of possibility. I had lost a family, but found myself. And in the end, that was the most valuable inheritance of all.